When the fifth generation of gaming consoles started coming out, there was a lot of them that were trying to put their head in the ring and see if they can find some success, but there was a lot of them that ended up flopping, starting with like the FM Towns Marty and the Amiga 32, and some of those were only specific to certain regions. But there was three that came out, and they came out here in the United States, and they had some level of hype around them, but they was quickly died out though once the Saturn, the PlayStation, and then the Nintendo 64 ended up coming out. Because once those came out, they pretty much died out. But at least for 1 year or so, they had a little bit of a hype around them. And even though they ended up flopping, and honestly, their games, there's not a whole lot to them and all that are, that they have like a good library of games. I do feel that at the very least, though, they were sort of putting their foot forward on what could possibly be done with the fifth generation, which now we're starting to maneuver over to more 3D graphics. And so they were sort of the pioneers of setting the groundwork for what those games would eventually become. There's a lot of there's not a whole lot again to these systems, but I thought I'd take a look at some of these here. And so I picked 5 games per system for the 32X, the 3DO, and the Atari Jaguar that at the very least I feel are, worth a look and that they have some fun merit to them. But because otherwise I did have a bit of a hard time trying to select at least 5 games per these systems here. But yeah, let me know if there's any others though that you feel are worth playing on these 3 systems. But other than that though, let's get going here with the 5 picks for each system that I have here to have a little look over on. We'll be starting here with the 3DO. And so the first game up here is Gex. And so this game was made by Crystal Dynamics and was one of the few platformers on this system. I do recall, I think, hearing something about that. The 3DO had a hard time doing like scrolling and such, and that might be maybe why the frame rate on this game is a little low. But Gex is ultimately it's a decent little platformer, and nothing too far from what you would probably see in 16-bit games as far as the platforming mechanics goes. But Gex can like climb on ceilings, and so that gives him a little bit of versatility on how he can, go through a level. And it does have some fun variety in the level. So, we're starting off here in this graveyard sort of area. And, but other than that, like I said, it's a fairly generic platformer. And when I look at the game now, the game uses sort of like these, almost like these pre-rendered sort of like sprites almost, almost like what they were trying to do with Donkey Kong. But something about the whole game now that it just feels a little stale now. And sometimes I feel the pixel art from the fourth generation just aged a bit better than some of these kind of graphics here. But it's not a bad game, and and it's a bit of a collectathon, but it does have some fun going through these levels here and trying to find some of the hidden secrets, and again, just exploring the themes of each level. So like this first, I like that this first one started off here in a kind of a Halloween setting, but it's also pretty funny too. I believe the actor that does a lot of the funny quips that the Gex does, I think it's Dana Gold, I believe, was a comedian that did the voiceover. I could be wrong. But it adds a bit of humor to the game and at least makes it a bit fun while he's kind of wisecracking along the way and, gives you a chuckle or two. Although after a while, it kind of starts wearing a bit thin. But still not bad, it's an okay platformer on the 3DO because, again, it was a system that really didn't get a whole lot. But yeah, I would say probably one of the more worthwhile games getting, although this game did end up getting ported over to the Saturn and the PlayStation, so which those versions, if I recall right, run a little bit better. But if you're wanting to stick with the 3DO, then this one's definitely one of the better ones. But next up here though I have is Blade Force. Now this game I don't have too much experience with, and I remember I played it some time ago when I first started getting into emulation. And I mean, it's a decent enough game, I guess, if you really put yourself back in that time frame when it came out, which would have been, I think, 1994, 95. It was a bit of a later release as far as the 3DO games go. And I do remember at one point there was a bit of hype going on with this game that I think some people were thinking that it was going to be a bit of a killer app for the 3DO. But after all was said and done, it's a mission based sort of shooting game, and kind of sort of in line with like that H3 Thunderstrike on the Sega CD. But the mission designs and all, I don't know, it's okay, but just nothing that was truly, I guess, groundbreaking and all for the for what we were expecting that the 3DO was going to be, and then the little bit of hype that this game had. But it's still kind of fun, and I'm always enjoying the Blade Runner aesthetics to this game. I'm always a sucker for that kind of like cyberpunk stuff, and it's like I said, if, at the very least, it's worth checking out. It is also one of the better looking 3D games on the 3DO, and does kind of show what the system was capable of to an extent. But it's all right. I mean, for what it is, and does have a character in there that sort of looks like Gustavo from Breaking Bad. At least that's what it looks like to me, anyways. The dude from the cutscenes there. But yeah, other than that, like I said, it's worth a look. But just don't be expected to be too blown away by this. But another game that I have here that I wanted to talk about is Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. Now, most of the games that I try to pick on these lists here, I try to do is to where they're like original games to the system, but it kind of got hard though, as there's just, at least for what I've played personally, there just wasn't a whole lot. But Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, I picked this one because at one point this was the only place to play this game that was, that you can play at home, because it wasn't until a little while later, if I recall, that this particular version came out. Because there was a Super Street Fighter 2 that came out like on the Genesis and the Super Nintendo, but not this Turbo one. And what this Turbo one adds is that it's got the turbo gameplay, or the speed, I should say, and then also has like it introduced a super move as well too. And for what this port is, it was pretty impressive because it's pretty much arcade perfect as far as the sprite works goes, the background and all. And I mean, if you were to put this side by side by the Super Nintendo or Genesis versions, yeah, I mean, yeah, you can tell that this is definitely a lot closer to the arcade. And so there was definitely a certain coolness to that. That again, we were getting games that were starting to be arcade perfect. There's just two things that kind of hamper this version, though. One of them is not kind of minor, but it is a little annoying. Is that, again, like I said before with Gex, it seems that the 3DO struggled with doing some kind of parallax scrolling. And so, for example, if you look at the game, there's it doesn't like the everything, the screen moves as one, right? Like the background doesn't scroll differently from the foreground. And so, again, not that big of a deal, but once you've kind of noticed it, then at least for me, it becomes, it kind of sticks out a bit. But the other major thing, and this is not really a fault of the game, just more the hardware itself of the 3DO, where the Street Fighter 2 has a 6-button layout, and the default controller for the 3DO is just not good for it. Capcom did release I think it was called like the Gold Star Capcom something pad, which had more of the 6-button layout and all, but even then I've heard it wasn't that great either. So I mean, it's a bit of a pain to try to play this game on the 3DO also for that there too. But again, outside of that, it's a great port on its own for what it is. And one cool thing that this version adds is that it adds it's kind of like a remix of the original music, and it sounds really good. It's my favorite sounding Street Fighter 2 soundtrack that's out there. And as far as I know, this is the only place that you can listen to this particular remix of this game here. I mean, outside of what's been released, I'm sure, like on YouTube and all. But for what it was, though, at the time, it was a unique way to listen to this game. And if you had if you somehow were able to get a decent control pad for it, it's definitely a really rock solid arcade port. But then next up, I have John Madden Football for the 3DO. And so this game, it's, I mean, I can imagine if I would have played this game back when it first came out, I would have been pretty impressed with it. Since then, since I played it on emulation and all, it's pretty fun. And I'm actually surprised of how well it plays for being a really early 5th generation football game. And definitely a step up from like some of the 3D football games that they were trying to do. So, for example, the Joe Montana football game on the Sega CD. but it's but when you go back to it, obviously it's going to be a bit rough and all, but it's still, I mean, it looks fairly impressive for the time. Right now, the same version that I'm playing on emulation, there's a lot of like font that is, you can't see. So, and I haven't played a football like game like this, so that, and so my gameplay is gonna suck here. But it was still pretty cool though to see something like this back then, and was, I mean, I can imagine, like I said, I would have been pretty blown away had I seen this game at the time when it first came out. But this and FIFA Soccer, I almost added FIFA Soccer on here because I felt that was a pretty fun sports games too. So again, at the time they were pretty impressive, and the 3DO, obviously flop, right? But at the very least, EA games or EA Electronic Arts did support the system to an extent, and well, a lot of that has to do with Trip Hawkins and his connection with EA games, because I know he was working there at one point. I don't know if he had already moved on, but from at this point, but they EA did at least try to support the 3DO to an extent, and so that's why some of the better games on there are from EA that are on the 3DO. Because speaking of EA, so for me, and probably my favorite game on the 3DO, if I'm not, if I'm not selecting the Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, but for me, my favorite game would be the Road Rash. And the 3D engine that they're using on this, it's not that bad. It runs fairly smooth for the time, and it's pretty detailed too. At least I know at the time when this game was first coming out that I thought that the textures and all look photorealistic. I mean, obviously now, right, they're pretty, they can look a little crude now, but it still runs fairly smooth. Again, if you can sort of take yourself back to this time here, and it controls, quite a bit, a lot like the Road Rash on the Sega Genesis, and so it's still got the same fun gameplay. And I mean, it is a lot of fun to go through this game here, and try to attack the other bikers on there, and try to avoid the road obstacles and all. And it's just a fun time. It's definitely not something that's too in depth, but you will have fun playing this game. That, and with the soundtrack from Soundgarden, and also just the music that plays while you're actually riding your bike, it's pretty cool overall, and definitely a fun game. Again, this game was also ported over to the PlayStation and Saturn, and I want to say even maybe the Nintendo 64. I'm not quite sure, but was still pretty impressive what they were able to pull off here with this 3DO version. And one, again, probably the game that I think is the most sought after on the 3DO as far as what's considered to be the best game on the system. But we're moving now over to the Jaguar. And so this one, I'm just sort of kind of speeding along here. I mainly wanted to just show some little bit of gameplay footage, because I don't really have a whole lot to say on these games here. But we're starting off here with Cybermorph. And so this game was a pack-in game for the Jaguar. And I mean, the Jaguar doesn't have a whole lot. And so I picked this one mainly just because it kind of cracks me up playing it. And really, that's about as much entertainment as I can get from it. I mean, it's like, you have this open space and you're collecting these pods and shooting some, crafts that are out there. But I mean, as far as I've gone into it, that's pretty much it. There's not a whole lot more. And I mean, I know it's early 3D and all, but this game would have come out in maybe 1993, I think, late 1993. But I mean, it's pretty bad. It's just not a lot of fun. And I think, again, the most enjoyment that I get from this is just how much this game has been memed, where you get that creepy green face that's going around the screen, just, saying, "Where did you learn to fly?" Or, "Well done. Well done." I swear one time I had a dream about that "well done" going over my head, and it was kind of a trip. But this game it's pretty bad. I just don't really get a whole lot of enjoyment other than just basically laughing at the game. But at the same time, they were experimenting, right, with how to play a game in a 3D space. So definitely, I guess you can give them credit for that. But in hindsight, it's just not a very fun game. But a game that's actually not too bad though, and that originated on the Atari Jaguar, and that was Rayman. And so, well, I actually I think that the maybe the PlayStation and the Saturn versions might have come out first. I don't know, but Rayman was announced on the Jaguar as an exclusive at one point. It's just that by the time it actually came out, again, either the Saturn and the PlayStation versions had just come out, or they came out roughly around the same time, which is a bit of a shame. Just because again, it would have been a more of a killer app on the Jaguar, but at the same time, I think everyone saw the writing on the wall that the Jaguar just wasn't going to be around for long. But what you get though in Rayman, I mean, it's a very colorful platformer. It's very fun, and it has some cool objectives in the mission on how to get through the level and trying to rescue those. What do they call those little planktoons or whatever they call? I don't even know what they're called, but those little things in the cages, and just it's a fun game. Yeah, I haven't gone too far into it. I mean, I beat several levels, and more so on the Saturn version. But I do hear that this game, the difficulty does start ramping up quite a bit though down later on. So just something to keep in mind that it is known to be a very difficult platformer. But one thing that I do like about this one is I've compared it to the Saturn one is the one that I've mainly played, and is that it's the loading that's pretty much non-existent, and while the music is not as good, just it feels a bit zippier, right? Just to get through because again the lack of loading and all, and it's like I said on its own, it's a pretty decent platformer, very colorful, very much showing what 2D games could look like on these fifth generation systems, and but like I said, it's just I guess ultimately a bit of a shame that this couldn't stay exclusive to the Atari Jaguar, or that the Atari Jaguar just had more legs to be more of a competitor in this, in the video game industry. That maybe this game might have been more of a, again, like more of a killer app for the Jaguar. But as it stands, though, it's a decent game for what it is. Just there's probably other versions that are probably better to get though. um, but then we got Atari cards, and I mean, like I said, there's not a whole lot for the Jaguar. I picked this game just because it's kind of plays like Mario Kart, but even then, it's just and I'm talking about Mario Kart on the Super Nintendo, not the one on the Nintendo 64. And but even then, it's pretty bland. There's just not much there. But again, you get some kind of enjoyment. I would imagine maybe in two player, it can be kind of fun, I guess. But that's if you can find someone that's willing to play this game with you, two player. But it's kind of weird though. The music is oddly a little catchy in it, but yeah, not a whole lot again with this game here. I mean, the characters are just fairly generic. The font, the level layouts, and all just not a whole lot of fun to look at, really. The power ups, I guess, are almost non existent, it feels. And the sense of speed is just really not there too much. And again, the track layouts are, they're not really. They're not really inspired, and so again, the only reason I picked it is because it sort of plays like Super Mario Kart, but that's about as best as of a compliment as I can give it because I emphasize the sort of part of it, and yeah, other than that, it's just a very very generic racer. But then next up, I have Alien versus Predator, and so Alien versus Predator was a game that when it was announced, and I was seeing the screenshots of it in the magazines, I was really wanting to play this game. It just looked really cool, and I'm a big fan of the Aliens and Predator movies, and so it just looked really impressive. The graphics looked really stunning on it. I remember they used to show this screenshot where I had a face hugger that was like right up to the screen, and it had like pretty much like no pixelization around it. I don't remember because I haven't really gotten up to that point where I've come across a facehugger in this game to see if that's still the case. But the screenshots I remember thought looked pretty cool, and yeah, I mean the game I just thought it would be like a really fun time, and so for a while this game was a bit of the holy grail of these systems here because again it was on the Jaguar. It wasn't really very popular, so not a lot of people got to play it, but supposedly this was like the killer app for it. Well, flash forward many years later, right, when emulation was the thing where you can emulate this game well enough, and it's pretty generic when it comes down to it. I mean, I much even prefer like Doom over this one. I mean, it's kind of cool, I guess, the concept again, that because you can select the Predator, Aliens, or a Marine, and, again, does have some fun with that, but it's a bit difficult. The level layouts are they're fairly bland, and a lot of the rooms seem like they repeat themselves a lot, so it's kind of hard to figure out where exactly you're going. And playing this on a Jaguar, or I mean, I can imagine on the Jaguar pad, or just like I'm emulating this game through the Xbox Series S and playing it like on the control pad. It's kind of hard to move. I mean, it's not hard to move. You can move around and all. It's just that don't think you're going to play this with a lot of really precise controls and all. But it's cool. It's worth checking out. Again, this is about as good as Jaguar games got, so it's cool checking it out for that, and also just because of the properties, right, that it uses the again with the Predator and Aliens. But yeah, like I said, right, it's the myth of this game was definitely far greater than the actual reality of the game. As when all is said and done, it's just a bit of a generic shooter, but still, kind of cool. Like I said, to check out at least for that. But for me, my favorite game though on the Jaguar, and probably probably my favorite game of these three systems here, and that's Tempest 2000. And so for this game, it's sort of like a reboot of the Tempest game from back in the day that I think came out in 1982 or so. But this game is a lot of fun. I will say that I do have fun with this game. And what it is just that you're on this grid and you're moving around this kind of ship thing. And as you're moving around this grid, you're just shooting your targets. And, just the more you shoot, that eventually you'll advance over to the next stage. You're trying to get a high score and all. So it sounds pretty basic, but the difficulty when it starts ramping up and all definitely keeps you on your toes. And it's a lot of fun. And the cool 3D effects on the grids that you're on, it's pretty impressive for the time. And it's all set to this really cool techno soundtrack too, which is pretty impressive sounding on the Jaguar, because again the Jaguar was cart based. And definitely I mean this is kind of what the Jaguar I think should have done. And I mean it had this and Missile Command 3D. I mean, I don't think it would have found much success, but at the very least would have been more of a cool novelty item. 'Cause if they would have done more of like updated classics like this one here, right? Because they had Missile Command 3D, but I don't know to what extent how good that one might be. But Tempest it's a really great time, right? Because it takes an old classic with that was a lot of fun to play back in the day, and just updates it with new visuals, a few new mechanics, and then some really cool music, and just you're in for a fun time with this game. And so this game is included with the Atari collection that came out some years ago, and definitely probably the more funner game to play on that collection there. As this is an excellent game, and would highly recommend to play this game if you're into like just kind of arcade style games. So Tempest 2000, pretty cool game. But we're jumping over to the 32X now, and so the 5 games that I have picked for this. If I out of the 3 here, so out of the 3DO, the Jaguar, and the 32X, I would probably say the 32X is probably my favorite, and the main reason for that is just because it does have some Sega games on there that I like, and even if they're some of the not the more better versions of certain series, right? So for example, starting here with Virtua Fighter, and so Virtua Fighter, it's a pretty good port of the arcade actually. And I think I preferred this one actually over the Saturn one, because the Saturn one is a bit more detailed, has a bit more polygons and all, but the glitchy ring on the Saturn, at least the very first one, it's a bit annoying. And so this one, even though it doesn't have as many polygons, but at least it feels more solid though. But the gameplay is otherwise the same as far as I can tell. And so I think this would be my pick actually for a Virtua Fighter home port version anyways. The music, it does take a bit of a hit, as the 32X basically, it was, I mean, as far as I can tell, it pretty much used the sound chip of the Sega Genesis, and there's even a lot of games on the 32X that just don't have very great music. So I'd have to, I know I've seen before on some videos and all what the whole deal is with the sound chip on it, or the sound that the 32X is able to do, but I think that's the case. But yeah, I mean the music on this is it's not bad. It just really dumbed down though. Like it's definitely sounds like 16-bit music basically. But yeah, other than that, like I said, it's a good port of Virtua Fighter. It's just that Virtua Fighter was immensely improved on by its later installments. That it's kind of hard to go back to this one. But if you can appreciate it for what it was at the time, in a home port of this game, and because at the time Virtua Fighter was pretty impressive, in the arcades, then yeah, it would have been pretty cool to play at home at that time. But continuing on with like the virtual name is Virtua Racing. So this one was called Virtual Racing, I think 32X Deluxe. So I think it was a full name or something like that. And so it's virtual racing, but you get some extra tracks and some extra cars. And virtual racing on its own, it's a decent arcade racing game. It was, the Model 1 originally arcade hardware, so kind of like Virtua Fighter. And, they were using mainly flat shaded polygons. And so, they were experimenting, right? And, trying to get some pretty cool 3D effects with using, those flat shaded polygons. So the arcade version, it was pretty impressive for the time. This 32X version, it does take a bit of a hit, obviously, right? It's, running at, the arcade, I don't know if the arcade's 60 frames per second or not. I'm not quite sure. But this version seems to run at roughly about 20 to 24 frames per second. So it's fairly, it can look a little choppy. And when I was playing it here, it did kind of hurt my eyes a little bit playing it. But, for what it is, though, it's still pretty fun. But I will say, though, as I'm playing this one, I was thinking about the Genesis port, and it's not too far off from what the Genesis port did on this. It does look better and a little bit smoother, but still kind of impressed with what the Genesis version was able to do on this. But for what it is, it's a fun racing game for what for its time, and so that's why it's one of my games here on this list here for one of my more, I guess, favorite 32X games. So Virtual Racing. I haven't really messed around with some of the other tracks, though. I've only mainly played like the first two tracks, but so another game that I have here for the 32X is Space Harrier. And so again, I try to pick more original games, but honestly, there just wasn't a whole lot on the 32X that I really enjoyed, or not really enjoyed, but just that I felt was worthy to place on this list. And so 32X, or I'm sorry, 32X, Space Harrier, I felt was, it was cool because it was a good port of the arcade. And it was the first time, I believe, that we got to play this game at home that was pretty much arcade perfect. The frame rate kind of chugs here and there a bit. But other than that, it's pretty much identical to the arcade. And so we were finally getting these super scalar games at home that were, getting arcade perfect. It took several years, almost a decade, but, here we are. No, actually, yeah, it was Space Harrier, because Space Harrier came out, I believe, in 1985. The 32X came out in 1994. So yeah, just about 9 years. But it was still pretty cool, though. I love Space Harrier. It's a great game. It's just, like I said, it is a bit of an older game, and that's what I'm saying, right? I think that's why I like the 32X the most, because it does have games that I like on it. It's just that, it's kind of a little too little, too late kind of thing. But still, though, not bad. And, Space Harrier is a classic. So for that, it made my list here. But another game that I added on here, and I mainly added it just because, to an extent, the graphics are kind of cool to look at. And that's for the Star Wars arcade game. And I believe this is based off of I think the Model 1 Sega arcade board. I could be wrong on that, but I would assume that this one took a bit of a hit coming to home, as, the frame rate is a bit choppy on it. But it's still pretty cool, though. You're playing the Star Wars arcade game, and, you got the polygonal graphics and all those cool things that those can do, like scaling, rotation, and all. And it does give you a sense of being in one of those space dogfights out there with, fighting in your X-Wing, fighting against the TIE fighters. And so that's pretty cool. It gets points for me for that, even though the gameplay it's not the greatest, but there is some coolness to it, though, right? And all you're looking at those big old Imperial ships and again the TIE fighters chasing you down. It's just unfortunate that the music is not the best. You would really want to hear like the classic Star Wars themes playing out here, to get you into the action, but it's it just does, it sounds pretty basic, so it doesn't really do a whole lot as far as, amping up the excitement factor on that. But it's fairly fun, and I guess it's worth playing, right? Just, if you're a big Star Wars fan, which I am, and so at the very least, right, that you can control an X-Wing, fighter. So there's, I guess, some coolness to that. It's got to be worth something, right? I'm kind of like reaching here to try to when I was trying to pick some of these games here because I'm like, it's just not that good though. but but yeah, but coming in with my last game here, the one, the 32X, and that I'll talk about overall, is so for Knuckles Chaotix, or Knuckles Chaotix. So this game kind of similar to so I mean I guess it would be my favorite game on the 32X, but kind of like Alien vs Predator on the Jaguar, and then to an extent Road Rash on the 3DO. For a while, they seemed like these mythical games that were supposedly really good, but just on these systems that didn't sell that well. And so I remember there was a few magazines that was really hyping up Knuckles Chaotix, specifically Game Fan, and so they made it sound like it was like this amazing platformer, right? Better than any of the other Sonic games that had come out, better than Sonic City and all. And so it was always, and I mean, the screenshots made the game look really colorful, and I was like, wow, this game, seems like it's really cool. Had this cool band mechanic to it, and it was always one of those games that I really wanted to play. Like, is it really that good? Well, again, flash forward many years later when, finally was able to emulate this game. And I want to say, I think it was one of the more first games that I ended up emulating once I found out how to emulate 32X. And boy, it was a bit of a letdown. It's a Sonic game, kind of like a Sonic game, but not also. It's kind of its own thing, and the whole weird band mechanic where like you push a button to hold down and then you go in one direction, and then you have almost like this rubber band effect between your other character as you sort of slingshot your way across the stages. And it's kind of fun, and I kind of have a hard time since I haven't played this game in a while, so I'm a little rusty right now, but I don't know, it's kind of annoying actually. But again, it at its core, it is kind of a Sonic game still, and so there is some fun in that there. And again, the graphics are really colorful in it, and the music is actually not half bad. And the bonus stages are, at the time, it was kind of a cool 3D effect, so it has some fun to it. And I mean, for me, I guess probably one of the better 32X games. But that's but as far as like a Sonic game, it's one of my least favorite Sonic games. So if that kind of gives you a gauge of like what the overall quality of the 32X library, but I guess, I mean, it's definitely worth playing just because of the Sonic characters and all. And so at least that way you can say that you scratch this off your list if you're really looking into getting into the library of a lot of different gaming consoles out there. It's probably one of the, this one's probably one of the more popular ones, I guess you can say. But, yeah, at the end of the day, not a whole lot to it. But, yeah, I mean, that's mainly what I have here on these games here, or these systems. There just wasn't a whole lot to them. And, I mean, I think it's cool that they, kind of were the stepping stones of what was to come later. But it was a bit of a rough start, though. But for that, at least, they should get some kind of a credit for, again, attempting and setting the groundwork right and all for what would come later. But that's what I got, though, on these here. And hopefully, at the very least, it gave you a bit of a glimpse on some of these games, which, aren't the most... there's just not a whole lot of information on some of these games out there. Because, again, they were on systems that were pretty much dead in the water. But at the very least, hopefully it gives you a bit of a glimpse of what they were all about. But if you do have any experience with these systems, let me know what your favorite games are on them, and I will see you in the next one.